They told you the Age of Pisces was about compassion, about Christ, about belief, but they didn't tell you the full story. They didn't tell you how it shaped your soul's blueprint, how it rewired your relationship to power, and why, for over 2,000 years, humanity was caught between surrender and control. The Age of Pisces wasn't just an astrological era. It was a psychological spell, a cycle of veils, a war between illusion and intuition, and a path you had to forget in order to remember. But now, the spell is breaking, and if you're watching this, it means your soul came here to witness the end and carry the thread into what comes next, because the truth about Pisces was never in the stars. It was hidden in you all along. They told you it was just a symbol, two curved lines, two fish swimming in opposite directions, a logo on a bumper sticker, a glyph on a zodiac wheel, gentle, harmless, vague. But symbols aren't decorations, they're codes. And this one, the twin fish, was never random. It was ancient long before astrology charts, long before horoscopes, long before the Bible wrapped it in parable. Because the Age of Pisces wasn't just about a constellation. It was about what that constellation unlocked. Think about it. A pair of fish tied together, forever swimming apart, not forward, not backward, just circling. It was a metaphor for the state of the human soul, caught between worlds, spirit and matter, faith and doubt, intuition and obedience. This wasn't by accident, because the Age of Pisces didn't just arrive with stars in the sky. It arrived with ideas in the mind, ideas about sacrifice, about guilt, about sin and salvation, and beneath it all, a quiet voice telling you to forget your inner knowing and follow something outside yourself instead. You've seen it everywhere. The fish became the first sign of Christianity, etched into catacombs, painted on chapels. But it wasn't new. Before Jesus walked the earth, the fish was already sacred in older traditions, tied to the sea goddesses, to fertility, to the womb of creation, to Isis, Aphrodite, Atargatis. Water has always been a mirror, and Pisces, the archetype of water, made everything unclear. In the Piscean age, emotion was truth, but emotion, when manipulated, becomes confusion. And so it did. For over 2,000 years, this frequency shaped the earth. Mystics call it the Age of Faith. But look deeper, and you'll see it was also the age of illusion. Not because faith is false, but because it was weaponized. Blind belief replaced embodied knowing. Hierarchies replaced inner gnosis, and the sacred was outsourced. You were told the divine was somewhere else. You were told to bow, to wait, to suffer quietly, and trust that reward would come later. And the fish, always swimming in circles, became the perfect symbol for a soul chasing something it already carried. But here's the part they never told you. You weren't just living in the Age of Pisces. You were absorbing it, breathing it, wearing it like a cloak you forgot you had on. The confusion you felt, the guilt, the longing for something more. It isn't just personal, it's generational, it's karmic, it's Piscean. And now that we've crossed into the Age of Aquarius, something is shifting. The veil is lifting, the tides are reversing, but you can't understand where we're going until you remember what the last age really did to your soul. And it all begins with that quiet symbol, the one you were told was just a fish. They called it the Age of Faith, the Age of Peace, Devotion, and Salvation. But faith in what? Peace for whom? because beneath the soft glow of its promises, something else was happening. Something colder, more calculated, something that didn't want peace. It wanted power. The Age of Pisces brought beauty, yes, poetry, mysticism, saints who gave their lives for love. But it also birthed empires disguised as religions. It forged dogma from the bones of mystics. It silenced the voices that spoke too clearly, and all of it wrapped in the illusion of spiritual purity. This age was ruled by duality. Everything became either or, good or evil, sacred or sinful, light or dark, saved or damned. There was no room for the middle, no space for the grey, no honor for the mystery. But that's the paradox of Pisces. It is the mystery, the sign of the ocean, of tides and mirrors, the place where truth can hide beneath layers of illusion. And those who understood this used it. The real architects of the Piscean age weren't the prophets. They were the interpreters, the scribes, the councils who decided what would be remembered and what would be erased. They turned teachings into rules, symbols into shackles, wisdom into weaponry, and across every continent, a similar pattern emerged. In Egypt, the sacred feminine was dethroned. In Greece, oracles became heretics. In Europe, the Gnostics were hunted. In the Americas, the Star Watchers were colonized. A global forgetting was underway, a quiet, creeping control that entered not just minds, but hearts. And it wasn't just religion, politics, economics, culture. All of it bent to the same underlying current. Obey, conform. Believe what we tell you, not what you feel. It wasn't about connection to the divine. It was about allegiance to the middleman. And so, the age that promised heaven also delivered crusades, inquisitions, colonialism, censorship. The fish, once a symbol of the womb, was now a banner for conquest. But here's the secret history most never see. Pisces was always about the inner world, about going within. But when the energy of Pisces is distorted, it doesn't turn inward. It turns passive. It waits for a savior. It doubts its own power. It drowns in the emotions it doesn't know how to alchemize. And for 2,000 years, humanity forgot the alchemy. We forgot we could swim in deeper waters and not lose ourselves. We forgot that faith isn't a contract. It's a current meant to guide, not to trap. So the Age of Pisces wasn't evil. It was hijacked by those who knew that controlling belief was the most powerful form of control there is. And now, as the spell begins to break, you are waking up in its aftershock, not to condemn it, but to finally understand the current you've been swimming in and rise above it. Faith was never meant to be blind. It was meant to be a bridge, a thread between the seen and unseen, between the human and the divine. But somewhere along the way, that thread was hijacked, not broken, worse, rewoven into something unrecognizable. The truth is unsettling. Most of what you were taught about faith wasn't about liberation. It was about loyalty, not to spirit, but to systems. The Age of Pisces began with mystics, with those who felt God, not just believed in Him, who dissolved into ecstasy, who walked with angels, who listened to dreams, who healed with breath, who traveled without moving, who knew that the divine was not above them, but within them. But mystics can't be controlled. They can't be taxed. They don't need temples, and they don't follow orders. So the mystic became the threat. And what replaced them wasn't true faith. It was institutional belief, belief with borders, belief with rules. Belief that told you what God thinks, how God speaks, who God favors, and who God will punish. And if you questioned it, you were called heretic, blasphemer, enemy of the faith. Because in this system, faith wasn't the beginning of your journey, it was the end of it. And make no mistake, it was engineered that way. Religious councils debated which texts would be sacred and which would be buried. Spiritual teachers were rewritten into kings and saviors, not mirrors of your own potential. The feminine was demonized, nature was feared, desire was condemned, and all of it in the name of God. But the God they gave you was silent, distant, judging, a God you couldn't feel, only fear. And what's more obedient than a soul that fears its own creator? So belief became a prison dressed as a path, and faith, the kind that moves mountains, was traded for doctrine that kept you small. But not everyone forgot. The mystics never left. They went underground. Their voices echoed in Sufi poetry, in Gnostic gospels, in the chants of Tibetan monks, in the songs of indigenous shamans, in the art of rebels who refused to paint inside the lines. And now, their whispers are returning. You feel it, don't you? That strange tension between what you were told to believe and what your soul knows to be true. That's the unraveling. That's the great unlearning. Because real faith doesn't silence your questions. It welcomes them. It doesn't demand submission. It invites presence. It asks you to stop outsourcing your truth and come home to it. The Age of Pisces taught us the cost of forgetting, but it also planted the seed of remembrance. And now, in you, that seed is stirring. Not blind belief, but embodied knowing. Not faith in what they told you, but faith in what you came here to remember. It began with a promise that someone would save you, that someone outside you held the key, that your pain, your sin, your suffering could be lifted by another. And in a world growing darker, that promise felt like light. But behind that light, a shadow grew. You were never meant to be saved. You were meant to remember. But remembering is dangerous because it wakes the sovereign. The Age of Pisces gave rise to many things: compassion, devotion, surrender. But it also birthed a powerful illusion that you were broken, that you needed a priest, a book, a prophet to stand between you and the divine. So religions rose, stone by stone, doctrine by doctrine, 1,000 interpretations of God, and yet somehow they all agreed on this: you were not enough. The temples became taller, the voices louder, the rituals more rigid, and the further the altars reached toward heaven, the further they pulled you from your own sacred center. Because if you looked within, if you touched the flame inside your own chest, you wouldn't need permission, you wouldn't need saving, and control would crumble. So they gave you idols, statues, saints, stories wrapped in fear, a paradise sold for obedience, a hell waiting for questions. They crowned martyrs and silenced mystics, burned witches and buried wisdom, and they called it holy. But the soul never forgets, even under centuries of silence, because deep within the human spirit, there is a knowing, a current, a pulse that says, I came from source, and I am still it. This is what was lost, not God, but your connection to her, to him, to it, to the eternal presence that breathes through you. Inner knowing is not loud. It doesn't shout from pulpits or thunder from mountains. It whispers, in dreams, in tears, in the stillness between heartbeats. And in the Age of Pisces, that whisper was drowned by the noise of saviors, by the weight of guilt, by the golden chains of salvation. But something is shifting. You felt it. The stories don't hold like they used to. The fear doesn't work the same way. You've started to look inward. And that terrifies the systems built to keep you looking up. Because if you realize the temple is within, you'll stop kneeling to the one outside. And if you see that you are never separate, you'll start walking. As the embodiment of truth itself, the fall of inner knowing was not a failure. It was a detour, a long forgetting. But the path back has always been here. Not in the clouds, not in the pages, but in the center of your own being. And you are remembering. You were taught to look up, to raise your hands, to bow your head, to search the heavens for answers that always lived inside. It began subtly, with songs, with prayers, with paintings of holy faces gazing down from unreachable heights. And you believed, not because you were naive, but because the Piscean age was powerful. It was beautiful. It made surrender feel sacred, and forgetting feel like devotion. But the moment you were taught to look up, you stopped looking in, and something ancient went silent. The great mystics whispered otherwise. Rumi, Jesus, Buddha, they all pointed to the kingdom within, the still small voice, the light that does not flicker. But their words were rewritten, repackaged, used to build walls instead of doorways. So you learned to reach, to search the skies for a God who had never left your chest, to chase worthiness as if it was something lost, when it had been your birthright all along. You were taught to trust institutions, to fear your own instincts, to ignore the pulse in your belly, the tears in your chest, the visions behind your eyelids, because truth inside you is dangerous. If you trust your inner compass, you won't be controlled. If you listen to your own knowing, you won't need their version of salvation. The blueprint was clear: worship the icon, not the essence. Follow the rules, not the resonance. The Age of Pisces, in its shadow form, was built on projection. 1,000 saviors outside the self, and each one pulling you further from the sanctuary within. But even in your deepest forgetting, you carried a spark, a memory, a murmur, a soft flame that whispered, "This isn't the whole story." And now that spark is growing, because you've knelt long enough, begged long enough, searched the sky long enough, and still the voice calls from the cave of your own being, the temple behind your ribs, the stars behind your eyes. Looking up was never wrong, but looking inward was the missing piece, because the Piscean blueprint wasn't about evil, it was about evolution. We had to learn surrender, we had to taste separation, to finally feel the ache of it, to crave the return. And now that craving is awakening you. The sacred isn't far. It never was. And what you've been told to seek above has been waiting, patient and holy, in the still waters of your soul. You're not just remembering, you're returning. They praise the ones who bled, the ones who bowed, the ones who died so others could live. And somewhere along the way, they taught you that pain was holy, that suffering meant salvation, that the more you gave up, the closer you'd be to God. But this wasn't always the story. The Age of Pisces brought with it a profound mythos, one that told humanity, to ascend, you must suffer. To be worthy, you must bleed. To be saved, someone else must die for you. This wasn't light, this was programming. Look closer. Across religions, across empires, the pattern is unmistakable. A central figure, a chosen one, a martyr, often male, often exalted through unimaginable pain, and always, always used as a symbol to keep you small. Because when one man becomes the Son of God, you stop believing you could ever be divine yourself. It was never about the martyr. It was about the message behind him. That obedience is noble, that questioning is betrayal, that guilt is holy. And so, a vibration spread through the soul of humanity, not the vibration of love, but of unworthiness, not the path of embodiment, but of escape. They told you this world was fallen, that your flesh was sinful, that your instincts were dangerous, and you believed it, because the stories were beautiful, tragic, heroic, because they were told with tears in the eyes and candles in the dark. But beneath the surface, it shaped your nervous system, to feel bad for feeling pleasure, to shrink when you should have roared, to apologize for simply existing. This wasn't just religion, it was an age-long vibrational spell. Martyrs were placed on altars, and in their shadows, billions forgot their own power. Can you feel it now? That weight on your shoulders, that's not yours. That shame in your chest, that's not truth. That fear of being too much, too free, too sovereign, that was taught to you. You didn't come here to suffer. You came here to remember. And as the Piscean era begins to fade, so too must the myth of salvation through pain. The New Age doesn't need martyrs. It needs creators. It needs awakened ones who know that heaven was never up there. It's here, it's now, and it begins with releasing the lie. That suffering makes you holy. Let the spell break. Let the soul rise. In dimly lit chambers and echoing stone halls, men gathered, not to discover truth, but to define it. They sat around scrolls and scriptures, not to understand the sacred, but to control it. The Age of Pisces gave rise to something unprecedented, a centralized spiritual authority, a single version of divinity, decided by vote and enforced by empire. It was called a council, but it was, in truth, a filter. What stayed? What was removed? What would be labeled God's word? And what would be burned as heresy? This wasn't divine revelation. It was politics, strategy, power. The Council of Nicaea, Constantinople, Ephesus, Chalcedon. These were the moments when the sacred became systemized, where mystical experience was replaced with dogma, where Gnostic texts, full of personal awakening, feminine energy, cosmic unity, were erased from the story. The Gospel of Mary, gone. The Gospel of Thomas, hidden. The writings that taught that you could know the divine directly were declared dangerous. And so the Bible became a curated library, sanctioned, sanitized, shaped not for illumination, but for obedience. The fish was already the symbol, but now the net was tightening. Only priests could speak for God. Only churches could hold the keys to salvation. And the people? They were to listen, to kneel, to pay. The Piscean energy, fluid, mystical, intuitive, was hijacked, turned into hierarchy. And with every decree, a deeper forgetting took place, not just of spiritual truth, but of our cosmic identity, our sovereignty, our birthright to remember. Because if you knew you were divine, why would you need a gatekeeper? If you could hear the voice of Source in your own heart, why would you confess to a man behind a curtain? But the councils didn't want mystics. They wanted members. They wanted minds that wouldn't question, only worship. And so, for centuries, reality itself was rewritten. They gave you stories, they took your symbols, they renamed your gods, they buried the feminine, they bound the mystical into leather covers and declared the rest forbidden. But something survived, in the whispers of desert monks, in the secrets of mystery schools, in the dreams of those who still remembered the stars. Truth never dies, it only hides, waiting for the soul brave enough to seek it again. And now, in the dawn of a new age, that soul is you. They didn't need chains, they didn't need armies. They had something far more effective. They had fear, they had guilt, and they had salvation as a product. This was the brilliance of empire in the Age of Pisces. Not just physical conquest, but spiritual control. Not just lands taken by force, but minds taken by story. They built systems that didn't just punish your body. They trained you to punish yourself. Believe this, or suffer forever. Obey this book, or burn for eternity. Follow this priest, or be cast into darkness. You weren't just a subject of a king. You were a sinner before a god. And in that carefully engineered hierarchy, the divine was placed outside of you, above you, far away, unreachable, unless mediated by the institution that sold the keys. Confess, repent, pay your tithe, repeat. From childhood, people were taught that they were broken, born wrong, tainted with something called original sin. Before you could walk, you were told you were guilty. Before you could speak, you were told you owed penance. But who profited from your shame? Who benefited from your fear? The empire did. The church did. The system built to keep you small. This was the Age of Pisces at its most shadowed expression. Spiritual truths twisted into tools of obedience. They used the archetype of the martyr. Suffer now, be rewarded later. Work hard, stay poor, serve well. And maybe you'll enter heaven. Meanwhile, those who preached this gospel lived in gold-covered palaces. They wore the crowns, they wrote the laws, they judged in the name of mercy, and ruled in the name of love. But real love doesn't demand obedience. It doesn't threaten eternal fire. It doesn't sell salvation like a product on a shelf. They used love as a leash, forgiveness as a weapon, hope as a bribe. And yet, beneath the surface, the soul never forgets. Somewhere deep inside you felt it. That quiet resistance, that flicker of rebellion. The knowing that something was off. That the God they described didn't feel like truth. That the divine couldn't possibly be a jealous, punishing king. And you were right. But questioning was dangerous. Doubt was heresy. Awakening was exile. Still, across the centuries, brave souls whispered truth, wrote in symbols, taught in secret, hid their scrolls beneath stone and desert sand, waiting for an age that could remember again. That age is now. The Piscean shadow tried to make you obedient, but the soul was always loyal to something higher, not to empire, not to religion, but to truth. And now that truth is rising, not from the thrones of the powerful, but from the heart that never forgot. It wasn't just doctrine. It wasn't just belief. It was blood. The Age of Pisces did not pass gently. Its shadows stretched wide, and its silence was enforced with fire. They called it holy, but what they did was anything but sacred. There were no witches, only women who remembered, herbalists, midwives, mystics, carriers of ancient knowledge, burned at the stake, not for evil, but for wisdom. They said it was Satan's work, but what they feared was the feminine, the intuitive, the embodied, the wild. They feared what couldn't be controlled, so they hunted it, cleansed it, crucified it. This was the age of Crusades. Armies sent not to liberate, but to dominate. In the name of God, temples were torched, scrolls erased, civilizations silenced, the Library of Alexandria gone, the teachings of the Essenes buried, the Gnostic Gospels hidden in clay jars for thousands of years. Why? Because knowledge is dangerous to the ones who feed on ignorance. Because a soul that remembers is a soul that can no longer be ruled. They told you history was progress, but much of it was suppression. Inquisitions turned faith into fear. Conversions became conquest. And even the mystics within the system, the ones who glimpsed truth, were silenced. Joan of Arc heard voices. Teresa of Avila saw light. Bruno saw the stars as living beings. They were not mad, they were awakened, and the system couldn't allow that. This was a war on consciousness, one fought not on battlefields, but in hearts, in dreams, in language. Words were weaponized, scripture distorted. Even the sacred name of the divine feminine was scrubbed from the records. Mother Mary became a silent statue. But once, she was a priestess, a guide, a mirror of Sophia, the Gnostic embodiment of divine wisdom. But in Pisces, silence was safer. So they whispered behind veils. They encoded truths in stained glass. They painted secrets into cathedral ceilings. The fish was the symbol, but the silence was the message. Do not speak, do not question, do not remember. But the soul does. The soul remembers everything, and it carried those memories into this life. You may not have been burned, but your ancestors were. You may not have led a crusade, but you inherited the karma. The Age of Pisces wasn't just a mythic period, it was a spiritual regime, and those who dared to see paid dearly. But now, the silence is breaking, and the ones once hunted are rising as healers, teachers, voices. You are not here to repeat that age, you are here to complete it. The shadow of Pisces was deep, but the deeper the shadow, the brighter the return of the light. You've seen the symbol, two intersecting circles, a shape like a portal, a womb, a fish. They told you it was about Jesus, but it's older than the name they gave him, older than the stories written about him, older than the church that rose in his name. This shape, the Age of Pisces, wasn't born in Christianity. It was carved into ancient stones long before Nazareth was whispered in scripture. It appeared in the temples of Egypt, in the mandalas of Tibet, in the blueprints of sacred geometry. Two worlds, overlapping, creating a third, the opening, the eye, the passage, the divine feminine giving birth to form. This was the true fish, the one swimming through the cosmos. Not a fisherman, but a gateway. Astrology tells us that every age lasts roughly 2,160 years. A grand cosmic clock, marked by the shifting backdrop of stars. Before Pisces, there was Aries, the age of the ram, of empires and warriors. And before that, Taurus, the age of the bull, of fertility cults and sacred earth rites. Pisces came as a tide, but it didn't begin in Bethlehem. It began in the sky, a new constellation rising with the spring equinox, the fish, and with it, a wave of mysticism, devotion, and the longing to transcend. The man they called Jesus was not the first fish, nor the only one. He was a carrier of an energy, a mirror of the age. But the message wasn't meant to become an empire. The early followers didn't build cathedrals. They gathered in caves. They shared bread and wine not to idolize, but to remember something vast and hidden, that the kingdom of heaven is within, that you are the temple, that divinity is not a throne in the clouds, but a flame inside your chest. But then came the power, the state, the swords, and the fish became a brand. What was once a symbol of unity became a mark of division. What was once a gateway to mystery became a gatekeeper of dogma. But the symbol never changed. Only the stories did. The Age of Pisces still speaks, in the iris of your eyes, in the shape of the pineal gland, in the geometry of the mandala, the almond-shaped opening in sacred art. It whispers the original truth, that life is born from union, that light emerges from intersection, that the divine cannot be contained in a book or a building. It flows like water, it swims through you. So the next time you see the fish, don't just think of religion, think of the stars, think of the womb, think of the ages, because it was never just about Jesus, it was about you and what you've forgotten to remember. She was there before the first stone was set, before temples were built, before scriptures were written. She was the breath beneath creation, the divine feminine. She was not a woman. She was a force, the pulse of intuition, the flow of emotion, the stillness that speaks without words. But as the age of Pisces rose, she was pushed into shadow. The age that came on the tail of the fish was meant to deepen compassion, to open the heart, to teach humanity how to surrender to love. But instead, love was packaged as obedience, and the feminine demonized. The sacred mother became a virgin or a whore. There was no space for her wildness, no room for her rage, no altar for her wisdom. Her temples were burned, her priestesses silenced. Her serpents, symbols of renewal and sacred knowledge, were turned into monsters. The Gnostics once said that Sophia, the feminine wisdom of God, had fallen into matter, not as punishment, but as a gift to help us remember. But they too were erased, declared heretics by councils who had never knelt to the moon. Across cultures, across centuries, you see the pattern. Inanna, Isis, Kali, Shekinah, names whispered in mystery, but stripped from the mainstream. They say the feminine is soft, but what they fear is her fire, because she births not only children, but revolutions. She calls not only for love, but for balance, for truth, for wholeness. And for 2,000 years, the Piscean age clung to hierarchy, to saviors instead of sovereignty, to a god in the sky instead of a goddess in the earth. Masculine energy was exalted, linear, directive, forceful. The father, the son, the king, the priest. But where was the mother? She was behind the veil, in the cave, in the bloodline stories erased by patriarchal pens. She was in the Magdalene, recast as a sinner, in the witches burned at the stake, in the healers, the seers, the wild women, all made dangerous by the very power they carried. But energy cannot be destroyed, only hidden, and now it rises again. Not to overthrow the masculine, but to dance with it. Not to dominate, but to restore the balance. This is the quiet revolution, the remembering that God was never just a he, that wisdom has curves, that divinity bleeds, nurtures, breaks, and births. The Age of Pisces tried to bury her, but she was never gone. She was just waiting. And now, she is waking up in you. You were told to wait. Wait for the right time. Wait for the right teacher. Wait for the right ritual, the the right passage, the right permission. They said enlightenment was reserved for the chosen. That sacred knowledge required a mediator, a priest, a prophet, a middleman. And so you waited. Lifetimes passed with your soul on pause, waiting for someone to tell you that you were finally worthy. This was not an accident. The Age of Pisces encoded a blueprint of dependence. Its spiritual map was built not around empowerment, but deferral. They replaced your inner compass with commandments, your soul's voice with scripture, your direct line to the divine with doctrine. It was subtle, it was systemic, and it was everywhere. From the way you were taught to pray, always upward, never inward, to the way you were taught to bow, in guilt, not reverence, to the way you were told to see the divine as something separate, distant, male, and watching. The message was always the same. You are not ready. You are not enough. Not until you're cleansed. Not until you're saved. Not until you're approved. But what if the waiting was the illusion? What if you've always had access? Not because of a title, not because of a ceremony, but because you are a soul. You were programmed to wait for permission, because if you realize the truth too soon, the systems would fall. Control depends on doubt. Empires are built on insecurity, and nothing threatens authority like a being who remembers their own light. So you were taught to fear your own power, to second-guess your visions, to doubt your intuition, to think humility meant shrinking, to believe holiness meant following. But the sacred was never meant to be locked away in temples. It was meant to burn in your chest, to rise in your spine, to echo in your breath. And the ones who knew this, the mystics, the rebels, the mystics, the mothers, they were shamed, silenced, or sanctified only after death. Because power after death is safe, but power alive in you, that's dangerous. But now, the cycle breaks. This new era doesn't require your obedience. It asks for your remembrance. Not of what they told you, but of what you've always known. You are the gate. You are the voice. You are the permission. You are never meant to wait. You are meant to awaken, and the time is now. You were born into a story already in motion. The air you first breathed was laced with centuries of belief. The language spoken to you carried echoes of guilt. The lullabies hummed beside your crib were woven with sorrow your ancestors never got to release. And you didn't question it, because it felt normal. It felt like home. But what if it wasn't yours? What if much of what you call you is the residue of an age that taught people to repress instead of reveal, to endure instead of express, to carry shame like a virtue, and call it humility? This was one of the deepest shadows of the Piscean age. It spiritualized suffering. It glorified repression. It romanticized martyrdom. And so entire generations swallowed their grief, locked away their rage, silenced their intuition, denied their desire, not because they were weak, but because they were told it was holy. Pain was framed as purification. Obedience was the path to redemption. And karma. Karma was presented not as a mirror of energy, but as a system of punishment. You were told that if something bad happened to you, you must have deserved it, that God was testing you, that your suffering was your spiritual duty, but none of that was true. Real karma isn't punishment. It's not divine vengeance. It's memory. It's vibration. It's the echo of unprocessed energy returning to be healed. But when karma is misunderstood, it becomes a cage, a way to justify trauma, a reason to stay silent, a divine excuse for human cruelty. This is how the Piscean age cloaked emotional repression in robes of righteousness. It made people feel guilty for being human, for feeling deeply, for breaking down, for asking questions. And over time, this became part of the collective psyche. Entire bloodlines inherited pain that was never theirs. Children absorbed the fears their parents never spoke of. And you learned to suppress, not because you chose to, but because the age demanded it. But repression doesn't disappear. It waits, it festers, it becomes illness, addiction, anxiety, explosions of rage that seem to come from nowhere. Except they don't come from nowhere. They come from all the places you were taught to hide. This is why the Age of Pisces still lives in your nervous system. It lives in your self-doubt, in your tendency to shrink, in your fear of taking up space. But now, you're beginning to see it. You're beginning to feel the dissonance, the ache that says, this isn't me, this never was. And that awareness, that whisper of truth, is the beginning of freedom. You don't have to carry what was never yours. You don't have to spiritualize what was survival. And you don't have to keep pretending that silence is sacred. Because the tide is turning, and your soul is remembering how to breathe again. You were born with a question already carved into your bones, a quiet ache that whispered, am I enough? And no matter how much you achieved, how many people you helped, how good you tried to be, that question lingered like a shadow. It followed you into your relationships, into your goals, into your spirituality. And maybe you thought it was just you, but it wasn't. It was an imprint, not personal, but historical. Not weakness, but programming. You were born into a myth that said, you are broken, you must be saved, and the only way to be worthy is to be chosen by something outside of yourself. This was the savior complex, one of the deepest psychological shadows of the Piscean age. It didn't just give us stories of gods and messiahs. It gave us a blueprint for identity, a template where worth was always earned, never inherent. It taught you that there was always something to be fixed, always something to be forgiven, always something just out of reach. And so you kept chasing love, chasing enlightenment, chasing a version of yourself that might finally be enough to be seen, to be chosen, to be safe. But no one ever told you the cost, because when you believe you must be saved, you never fully trust yourself, you never fully rest, and you always feel just a little bit broken. This is not a coincidence. It was by design. The Piscean age spiritualized inadequacy. It made humility synonymous with self-neglect. It turned self-sacrifice into a moral ideal, and self-love into something selfish. And slowly, generation by generation, people stopped trusting their own divinity. They outsourced it to priests, to doctrines, to systems that claimed to hold the keys to heaven, while quietly convincing you that you were unworthy of holding them yourself. So even as you awakened, you carried the residue, that subtle voice inside that says, you need to do more, heal more, be more, because who you are couldn't possibly be enough. But that voice, that ache, is not truth. It's memory, an echo of a world built on disempowerment. And now, you're starting to see through it. You're starting to remember that the light you were taught to worship is the same light that lives within you. You are not here to be saved. You are here to remember, to reclaim, to embody the part of you that was never broken to begin with. Because the truth is, the Savior you've been waiting for is the one looking through your eyes right now. and they've been waiting for you to finally believe it. Something began to stir, softly, quietly, almost imperceptibly at first. It didn't come with thunder. It didn't announce itself with fire or prophecy. It was more like a whisper inside the chest, a knowing without a source, a pull without direction. And it began for many around the year 2012. Mainstream culture treated it like a joke, a meme about the end of the world. But those who were listening, those who had ears to hear, felt something else. It wasn't the end, it was the beginning. Because deep in the collective soul of humanity, a shift had already started. The Age of Pisces was unraveling, not in the headlines, not in politics or technology, but in you, in your dreams, in your restlessness, in that unshakable feeling that something was off, even when life looked normal on the surface. You couldn't explain it, but you began to feel homesick, not for a place, but for something you couldn't name, truth, meaning, wholeness, something deeper than what religion had offered, something more real than the distractions of the modern world. The matrix was cracking, and through those cracks, light began to leak. 2012 wasn't a doomsday. It was an energetic hinge, a moment where the vibration of the planet subtly shifted, and your soul felt it. Ancient cultures marked this time. The Mayans, the Hopi, the Egyptians, all knew that great ages do not end with explosions. They dissolve quietly as new energies rise beneath the old. And this is what you were feeling: the unraveling of the Piscean illusion, the dissolving of inherited dogmas, the soft dismantling of old contracts you never consciously agreed to. You started questioning things you once accepted. You began remembering things you'd never been taught, and you couldn't go back, even if you wanted to. Because once the soul awakens, it doesn't sleep the same way again. It may close its eyes from time to time, but it will never fully forget. And that's what makes this moment so sacred. You are the bridge. You are the hinge between ages. The soul who chose to wake up in the dying light of one world, so you could carry the torch into the next. You weren't born to watch history. You were born to remember it, to transmute it, and to help build what comes after. Because the end of the Age of Pisces isn't about collapse. It's about the return of something we lost, and the beginning of something we haven't yet imagined. And your soul felt that long before your mind could explain it. That feeling you've been carrying, that ache you couldn't name. It was the age whispering. It's time. You didn't come here by accident. Not to this era, not to this life, not to this moment. You were born during a planetary threshold, a changing of the ages, a time prophets and mystics spoke of, when the veil between worlds would thin and souls with ancient memories would return. You are one of them, not because you were chosen by something outside of you, but because your soul chose this, long before your first breath, long before your name, long before the stories of your childhood shaped your identity. Somewhere beyond time, your soul made a vow to return at the edge of two worlds, a vow to carry the wisdom of the old and plant the seeds of the new. That's why you've always felt a little out of place, like you didn't quite fit in, like the world around you never fully matched. What you felt was true on the inside. It wasn't a defect. It was the signature of a transitional soul, a soul born not to belong, but to transform. The Age of Pisces trained humanity to follow, to submit, to wait for answers to come from someone else. But you didn't come here to follow. You came here to remember. And remembering isn't easy in a world built to distract you. You'll be misunderstood, tested, tempted to forget. But every time you question the system, every time you listen to your inner knowing instead of the noise, you're doing what you came here to do. You're breaking the loop. You're unwriting the script. You're collapsing the timeline that no longer serves the soul of humanity. That is not small work. It's not glamorous. It won't always make sense, but it is sacred. And the truth is, many souls didn't want to come here during this time. The chaos, the density, the fragmentation. But you said yes, because you knew that awakening doesn't happen in comfort. It happens in contrast. And this time, this age of transition is made of contrast. Old truths and new wisdom, dying systems and rising visions, fear and remembering, control and liberation. And you're here in the middle of it all, not to be consumed by it, but to walk through it awake, to carry the torch of what you know is true, even when no one else sees the flame. So if you've been wondering why you're here, why you feel so much, why the world feels like it's cracking open and reassembling itself at the same time, it's because this moment, this threshold, was the assignment, and your soul never forgot. They told you this was the way things have always been, that the struggle, the guilt, the waiting for something greater was part of your nature. But what if it wasn't? What if it was just the water you were swimming in? The Age of Pisces soaked every soul in a current of self-denial and external seeking. We were taught to place the divine outside of us, in temples, in gods, in distant heavens. We were conditioned to believe that only through suffering could we be worthy, that only through obedience could we be saved. But the truth is, none of that was you. It was a pattern. And every age carries its own pattern, its own atmosphere of belief, of behavior, of perception. Most souls never realize they're inside one. Like a fish doesn't see the ocean until it begins to leave it. Awakening starts not with rebellion, but with remembrance, not with force, but with curiosity. What if everything I believed was inherited, not chosen? What if I was born into a story, but I'm not here to repeat it? What if the savior I've been waiting for is actually waiting for me? To question the water you were born in is to reclaim your direction, because Pisces was never your destiny. It was your context. It was the initiation of a collective lesson, one of separation, devotion, sacrifice. And now, that story is unraveling, not because it was wrong, but because it's complete. But here's the secret most never grasp. If you don't question the water, you carry it with you into the next phase, into the next age. You become the vessel of the past, disguised as the present. That's why this moment matters, because your soul is standing at the edge of a tide that is pulling in two directions. One, back into the familiarity of guilt and external power. And one forward, into sovereignty, into union, into unfiltered truth. To break the pattern doesn't mean to destroy the past. It means to see it clearly, to honor the role it played, to take the lessons and leave the illusion. You were not meant to stay in the womb of Pisces. You were meant to awaken from it, not as a rebel, but as a remembering. And now the waters are shifting. Can you feel it? That ache in your chest when old systems no longer make sense. That quiet knowing that you're more than the titles you were given. That pull to something, not outside, but within. That's not rebellion, that's evolution. And it begins with one question: whose story am I still living? They say time moves forward, but energy lingers. The age of Pisces may be ending, the constellations may be shifting, but the consciousness of that age, the stories it seeded, the systems it sanctified, still echo through the fabric of our world. Because an age doesn't end with a date. It dissolves slowly, like the tide receding from the shore. And if you listen closely, you can still hear it. In the language of our leaders, in the structure of our religions, in the stories our movies tell. Sacrifice is still glorified, obedience is still rewarded, and salvation is still sold as something outside of you. Even in spirituality, the Piscean spell remains. We idolize gurus, we cling to saviors, we trade inner knowing for mystical theatrics, waiting for signs, visions, or otherworldly voices to tell us who we are. But all of it is a reflection of an age that taught us we were not enough, that suffering was sacred, that authority must be obeyed, that truth could only come from a source greater than the self. The symbols have changed, the names have changed, but the vibration is the same, because collective consciousness moves like a glacier, massive, slow, and powerful. And though the age of Aquarius may be rising, the ice of Pisces hasn't fully melted. You see it in the way we still divide ourselves, in how we cling to ideologies, in how quickly we silence voices that speak from within. The old age trained us to conform, not to question, to look up, but never in. And so even now, as the frequency of Earth begins to accelerate, many are still dragging anchors from a sea that's already fading. This isn't about blame, it's about awareness. Because until you see what you're still carrying, you can't release it. The shadows of Pisces don't just live in cathedrals or ancient texts. They live in the assumptions you were never told you made. They live in the hesitation to speak your truth, in the fear of being seen as too much or not enough, in the urge to wait for someone else to give you permission. But something is changing. There's a pressure building, a quiet uprising inside the souls who remember that the age may be over, but the influence is not. And that means the work isn't done. Not until we reclaim the stories, not until we deprogram the guilt, not until we rise as creators, not followers. Because an age only truly ends when its echoes no longer define who we are, and that choice is ours. The sky didn't flip a switch. There was no trumpet, no sudden awakening, no line in the sand where Pisces ended and Aquarius began. Instead, something subtler happened. A mirror was lifted, and all that Pisces had buried, the guilt, the savior complexes, the quiet obedience to systems dressed in golden robes, began to shimmer on the surface. This is the paradox most miss. The age of Aquarius didn't arrive to delete what came before. It came to reveal it, to expose what was hidden, to bring light where Pisces demanded shadows. We are not in a clean break. We are in the overlap, the intertidal zone, where two oceans meet and the waters churn. That's why you still feel the confusion. That's why you still see the institutions holding on, still clinging to hierarchy, still whispering the old promises in a new voice. Because Pisces was a master of illusion, of stories that felt holy but were hollow, of teachings wrapped in divinity but tied to control. And Aquarius? Aquarius is the current that unravels the veil. It doesn't destroy the temple. It turns on the lights. It doesn't shout rebellion. It questions everything, especially the self. This is why the two ages are still active, because we, as a species, haven't chosen fully. We straddle both worlds. We chant about freedom, while still fearing our own voice. We seek community while secretly waiting for someone else to lead. We scroll for wisdom, but resist the silence that would awaken it. Pisces planted the belief that truth is given. Aquarius reminds us that truth is uncovered, and that uncovering isn't always comfortable, because to see clearly means seeing yourself, not the mask, not the story, not the belief you inherited, but the raw presence underneath it all. And when that happens, when the mirror sharpens, you start to recognize which parts of you are still swimming in Piscean waters. The urge to play small, the fear of punishment, the longing for someone to come save you. These didn't come from your soul. They came from the age that shaped your ancestors, your society, your mind. But now, something deeper is knocking, and it's not asking for a revolution. It's asking for responsibility. Aquarius doesn't give you the answer. It gives you the space to find your own. So don't be fooled by the noise. The new age didn't silence the old one. It simply made its echoes impossible to ignore. And in that revelation, you are invited to choose not a timeline, not a side, but a self, a frequency, a way of being that aligns with the light that no longer hides. Because Pisces was the dream, Aquarius is the awakening. And now, you're remembering both. Something is shifting. And it isn't just in the stars. It's in the marrow of your being, a quiet rebellion inside your spiritual DNA. For thousands of years, belief was the currency of truth. You were taught what to believe, told who to trust, promised salvation if you obeyed the script. But belief is fragile. It wavers. It clings to what others say is real, never quite touching the fire for itself. Pisces made belief sacred. Aquarius makes knowing inevitable. This is not the same knowing as information. It isn't found in doctrine or data or a perfectly polished sermon. It's cellular, felt, spoken not in words, but in a vibration that pulses through you like a tuning fork finely struck in resonance. You don't believe you're connected to the universe anymore. You feel it. You don't hope you're divine. You remember it. And with that remembrance comes the collapse of old codes, of inherited blueprints that once dictated your path without consent. The Piscean age programmed your spiritual operating system with hierarchy, with distance, with stories that place the sacred far away, on thrones, in temples, behind veils. But that coding is being rewritten. Aquarian frequency doesn't arrive with a sword. It arrives like water, subtle, persistent, unstoppable. It doesn't demand you renounce the past. It simply makes it irrelevant, because once you've tasted your own light, you cannot go back to begging for someone else's. This is the alchemy at play now. You are no longer who you were trained to be. The doubts that once ruled you, they're not yours. The fears that whispered you were not enough, they came from the fishbowl, not the ocean. And your soul, it's starting to swim again, not in borrowed belief, but in sovereign knowing. That's the Aquarian mutation, a rewiring of the spiritual body, from passive receiver to conscious creator, from awaiting instructions to remembering instinct, from obedience to embodiment. And with every layer you shed, you make space for something ancient yet new, a wisdom not written in any book, but carved into the ether of who you are. You begin to realize you were never lost. You were just living on borrowed programs. And now, finally, you're returning to source code, one that doesn't separate you from the divine, but reveals you as it, not a student of truth, a vessel of it. And the moment you stop believing is the moment you start knowing. This is the age of return, not to the past, but to the frequency your soul always remembered. And now, it's beginning to speak again. You were never meant to spend your life kneeling, not before a throne, not before an altar, not even before the stars. The age of Pisces taught you to worship what was outside of you, to fear it, adore it, obey it. But that age is fading now, and something ancient inside you is beginning to stir, not with doctrine, but with remembrance. The rise of mysticism is not a trend. It is not a rebellion. It is not even a search. It's a return to what has always been waiting, beneath the layers of sermons and scriptures, beneath the roles and robes, beneath the guilt and glory. There is a memory, a flicker of truth, a silent voice that says, "You already knew." The Piscean age painted holiness in robes and rituals. It made divinity a distant thing. It told you that you were broken and needed to be saved. It crowned prophets and martyrs and told you to follow, not feel. But mysticism does not ask you to follow. It asks you to become, to close your eyes and see what's behind them, to sit in stillness and remember the language that has no words. Mysticism is rising because the soul is done playing small. It is done begging for crumbs of grace when it is the bakery of heaven itself. It is done repeating lines it never wrote. The Aquarian tide is not here to add more voices. It is here to quiet them, so you can finally hear your own. You are not here to repeat. You are here to rediscover, to take the symbols and codes once weaponized and transmute them back into light. The fish, the water, the cross, the eye. These were never meant to enslave. They were meant to unlock. And now, they are doing just that. Mysticism is not a rejection of religion. It is the whisper of the truth that religion once carried, before it was caged, before it was claimed. It is not an escape from tradition. It is the soul's way of finishing the sentence that tradition began, before it was interrupted by empire. This is why so many are turning inward. This is why the veil feels thinner now. This is why your dreams are louder, your synchronicities sharper, your longing deeper. It's not coincidence, it's memory. The kind of memory that doesn't come from the brain, it comes from the origin. The Piscean age was the age of belief, but this is the age of knowing. Not what you've been told, but what you remember. You are not here to bow to something that lives in the sky. You are here to awaken what has always lived inside. You are not here to worship. You are here to remember, and you always have been. It was never a mistake that your soul incarnated during the tail end of Pisces. You didn't arrive late. You arrived right on time. Because Pisces was a school, and schools are not meant to last forever. They're meant to initiate, to challenge, to stretch. They are places of forgetting and remembering, of falling asleep and then beginning to wake up. Pisces gave you roles, gave you rules, gave you rituals. It wrapped divinity in distance, told you God was elsewhere, unreachable, unknowable, untouchable. It made you bow, made you weep, made you search, and maybe. That's exactly what it had to do, because some souls only remember who they are by first pretending they are not. But now, the bell has rung, the lesson has ended, and the Age of Aquarius does not bring a new teacher, it brings a mirror, one that does not instruct, one that reflects, not what the world told you to be, but what you truly are beneath it all. Where Pisces pointed to heaven, Aquarius hands you the blueprint of the universe inside your own body. Where Pisces said believe, Aquarius says remember. Where Pisces asks for sacrifice, Aquarius invites alignment. Not because one age was wrong, but because one age was foundational and the other is transformational. You were meant to learn devotion under Pisces, but you are meant to embody sovereignty in Aquarius. This is why the world is shaking, why old systems are collapsing, why so many are cracking open. It's not chaos, it's curriculum. The mirror is being held up, and some are terrified to see their reflection. But others are beginning to recognize the face staring back. The mirror doesn't judge, it reveals, it doesn't punish, it clarifies. And when you stand before it, raw and exposed, it won't ask who you've been. It will ask, are you ready to become who you really are? Pisces taught you how to follow. Aquarius dares you to lead yourself. Pisces introduced karma as debt. Aquarius reframes it as resonance. Pisces said truth is something given. Aquarius says truth is something felt. It vibrates. It moves through you like a wave through water. That's the transition you're living in now, the threshold between instruction and integration. And yes, sometimes it feels lonely, confusing, even unbearable, because every mirror has a cost. It forces you to stop running from your own reflection. But if you stay, if you breathe, if you allow yourself to truly see, you'll find something unimaginable was always waiting behind the glass. This is the moment of embodiment, not to escape the Piscean past, but to complete it, to take what was fractured, programmed, distorted, and turn it into clarity, truth, and light. The age of Pisces taught the lesson. The age of Aquarius is here to ask, did you learn it? They built it to last forever. The churches, the governments, the institutions that claim to speak for God, rule for the people, and report the truth. But eternity is not made of bricks and paper. It's made of vibration. And when the vibration shifts, what once felt eternal begins to crack. What you're witnessing now is not the destruction of the world. It's the unraveling of an illusion. Because religion, politics, and media as you've known them were not built for awakening. They were built for obedience. And those structures, as powerful as they seemed, were rooted in a Piscean blueprint, a system of spiritual hierarchy, divine intermediaries, and filtered truths. A world where someone else had to tell you what was sacred, where the narrative was always curated, and where silence was often the price of survival. But silence is no longer sustainable, because the Aquarian current has arrived. Pisces was about belief. Aquarius is about knowing. And when the veil begins to lift, even slightly, the old systems start to tremble, because their strength depended on your forgetting, your doubt, your disconnection from your own divine center. Now, the media no longer owns the story. The temple is no longer a place, it's a state of consciousness. And the throne, it's collapsing because its power never came from within. Some will say this is chaos, that society is breaking down. But what's truly breaking is the trance. We were never meant to live in a world where profits mattered more than truth, where leaders ruled by fear instead of vision, where information was filtered through agendas instead of light. And so, one by one, these pillars are falling, not because of some punishment or prophecy, but because the frequency no longer supports them. This is not the end of civilization. This is the beginning of conscious civilization. And yes, the process is uncomfortable. It always is when you outgrow your skin. But you weren't born to keep the past intact. You were born to be part of the new architecture, not built from stone, but from soul. So when you see the headlines of collapse, when you feel the uncertainty rising, remember, The old is not dying because you're failing. It's dying because you're remembering, and you are vibrating beyond it. Just because the tide is turning doesn't mean the ocean has forgotten you. Pisces, even in its fading, still knows your name. It whispers through old patterns, through the voice of guilt, through the temptation to wait just a little longer for someone to save you. This is the final spell. Not loud, not violent, but seductive. It tells you to doubt your knowing, to kneel before the throne you already walked away from, to second-guess the power you've begun to remember. Because the Piscean system wasn't just a structure, it was a story, embedded deep in your nervous system. The story of waiting, of sacrificing, of suppressing. The story that made you question if your truth was too much, too radical, too unworthy of divinity. But now you're here, and the spell, it's unraveling. You feel it when old beliefs no longer hold weight, when rituals feel empty, when institutions feel hollow, and when the voice inside you speaks louder than the voices outside you. Still, Pisces will try. It will show up in disguised loyalty, in the fear of disappointing family, in the pull to explain yourself, to shrink, to apologize for your awakening. And yet, this is exactly where sovereignty is born, because sovereignty isn't rebellion, it's remembrance. It's the sacred no that clears the path for a deeper yes. A yes to inner guidance, a yes to truth without permission, a yes to becoming the temple instead of searching for one. The final echoes of the Piscean spell are subtle. They show up when you compare your journey, when you feel the urge to conform, when you hesitate to speak what you know, because it doesn't match what you were taught. But you are not here to be safe in the old system. You are here to be free. And freedom requires one thing the Piscean age never taught you: self-trust. This is how the spell breaks. Not with a sword, but with awareness. With the soft, grounded presence that says, I don't need to be rescued. I don't need to be approved. I only need to remember who I am. So if you feel the past pulling at your ankles, trying to rewrite your frequency, don't fight it. Just see it, name it, and then step forward anyway. Because this is not the age of obedience. This is the age of awakening. And you are not here to carry the old weight. You are here to dissolve it. Faith was never the problem. It was what we placed it in. For over 2,000 years, humanity gave its faith to figures, doctrines, and distant heavens. We bowed to idols built from stories and forgot the frequency behind the story. The Age of Pisces was a school, a long initiation into devotion. But devotion without discernment becomes dependency. You were taught to believe, even when something didn't feel true, to follow, even when the path silenced your soul, to obey, even when your intuition whispered otherwise. Because that was the Piscean current: faith over feeling, hope over resonance, blindness mistaken for surrender. But the age is turning, and with it, the frequency is shifting. Aquarius isn't here to destroy faith. It's here to evolve it, to alchemize it. Because now, it's not about what you believe. It's about what you embody, not the words you say, but the vibration you hold. You're no longer being asked to believe in something outside yourself. You're being asked to tune in, to feel, to resonate. In the Aquarian age, truth doesn't arrive in scripture. It arrives in sensation, in synchronicity, in the magnetic pull toward what makes your cells light up, what aligns with your nervous system, not just your indoctrination. You were never meant to outsource your divinity, only to remember it. through contrast. Pisces was the veil. Aquarius is the light behind it, but you only know the light because you were brave enough to walk through the darkness. That's the irony of spiritual evolution. We had to believe in illusions to discover the power of direct knowing. And now faith becomes frequency, not passive, but active. Not a waiting, but a tuning. You are learning to listen with your body, to sense what aligns without needing permission, to recognize when a teaching lowers your vibration, no matter how ancient it sounds. Because in the Aquarian current, resonance is king. You are no longer a follower. You are a transmitter, a receiver, a lighthouse. And your compass isn't belief, it's vibration. So if you feel the old Piscean voices creeping in, telling you you're wrong, telling you you need saving, telling you to stay small, breathe, feel into the truth. Does it contract your soul or expand it? That's your answer. That's your map. That's the age you were born for. Not to have faith in someone else's truth, but to become the frequency of your own. There was a time when we needed the guru, when the mysteries of the universe were locked behind temple doors, when sacred knowledge was encoded in languages we could not read, when we were still learning to trust the voice inside. So we followed. We looked to robes and titles, to staffs and scrolls, to men on mountains who told us they had seen the face of God. And maybe they had, but the Age of Pisces taught us something deeper, that we were never meant to live at the feet of another's awakening, because no matter how enlightened the teacher, no one can walk your path for you. The guru was a bridge, but too many stopped at the bridge and forgot to cross. We worshipped the messenger and missed the message. We memorized the maps, but never dared to explore the territory within. Pisces told us to look up, to saints, to prophets, to saviors. Aquarius whispers, look in, because the true temple is not on the mountain. It's in your breath, in your heart, in the quiet space between thoughts, where your soul already knows. The guru was a mirror, but too often we mistook the mirror for the self. We bowed to the reflection, instead of recognizing our own light staring back. But something is changing now. The veil is thinning. The inner compass is activating, and the world is filled with noise. But your intuition, it's getting louder. You're starting to feel the difference between truth and performance, between wisdom and branding, between the one who points to the path and the one who walks it with you. In the Age of Aquarius, the age of the guru is dissolving. Not in disrespect, but in remembrance. You don't need a robe to be holy. You don't need a title to be tuned in. You don't need permission to connect with the divine, because the spark is already within you. The same light that shined in them shines in you. And now, it's time to trust it. Not blindly, but bravely. You'll still meet guides, mentors, teachers, but you'll meet them differently. Not as someone to follow, but as someone to reflect what's already waking up inside of you. This is the return to sovereignty, to the original priesthood, the one of your soul. So if you've been waiting for a sign, for someone to tell you it's your time, for the guru to hand you the key, look in the mirror. It's always been you. You weren't born randomly. Your soul didn't just appear in this timeline by accident. There were no dice rolled in the sky, no spiritual clerical error that placed you here, right on the edge of two ages colliding. You came with purpose. You came with memory. You came as a bridge. Because the cusp, this sacred threshold between Pisces and Aquarius, isn't just a calendar event. It's a turning of the soul. And you were born into the storm between two songs. Pisces was the hymn of hierarchy. Aquarius is the rhythm of resonance. And you carry both. You felt it, haven't you? The war inside your body, the pull between obedience and freedom, between yearning for belonging and aching to break away from every system that promised you love, but sold you control. You're not just a seeker, you're a translator. You're here to remember the language of one age and teach the syntax of the next. That's why it hasn't been easy, because cusp souls carry double weight. You inherited the illusions of the old world, but were encoded with the visions of the new. You've had to grieve systems your ancestors worshipped. You've had to unlearn stories written in your blood. You've had to walk away from temples that once felt like home. And still, you hear the call. You see through the veil. You question the script. You feel the tremble in the collective field that says, this isn't working anymore. Because it's not. This moment, this transition, is sacred, is the final inhale of a dying frequency, and the first exhale of a world being reborn. And you are the breath between. Not everyone will understand. Some will cling to the age that taught them who they were. Others will run too fast into what's coming, without anchoring the lessons of what was. But you're learning how to walk the line, how to hold the grief and the glory, how to be both student and guide. This is why your life has felt intense, why nothing seems to fully fit, why you're drawn to mystery, truth, and the unseen. You came here for this, to carry the wisdom of the past without being weighed down by it, to help build a world where knowing replaces dogma, and presence replaces performance. You are not here to destroy the old. You are here to midwife the new. So don't rush the bridge. Don't curse the tension. You are the cusp, and your soul knew exactly what it was doing when it chose this moment. There's one last lesson Pisces left behind, and if you miss it, you carry the weight of an entire age into the next. The lesson is simple, but it isn't easy. Let go. Let go of the martyr complex that made you think pain was proof of purity. Let go of the waiting that convinced you someone else was coming to save you. Let go of the fear that whispered you were never enough, that God was far, and heaven was earned through suffering. Let go, because that spell was the final echo of the age, and you are not meant to carry it anymore. Pisces taught through sacrifice, through surrender, through stories of chosen ones who bled for your sins, while you sat, waiting for the veil to lift. But the age has shifted, and the new world doesn't rise on wounds. It rises on remembrance. So ask yourself, what are you still gripping that belongs to an older frequency? What guilt still makes you shrink? What shame still makes you kneel? You are not here to suffer for your light. You are here to embody it. You were never meant to carry collective karma like a cross. You were meant to release it, like breath, like smoke, like memory fading in the morning sun. But that requires something terrifying to the Piscean psyche. Trust, not in a savior, not in a system, not even in a set of spiritual rules, but in yourself, in the frequency you came here to hold, in the knowing that's been echoing inside you since the moment you arrived. Pisces left many gifts, but it also left scars, and the only way to heal them is to stop reopening the wound. You don't have to prove your worth. You don't have to earn your freedom. You don't have to wait for a sign from the sky. You are the sign. You are the shift. You are the sacred reminder that the soul was never broken, just buried. The last lesson of Pisces isn't about abandoning faith. It's about remembering that faith without presence is a prison. And you are no longer a prisoner of an age. So breathe, let go. Feel the vibration rising beneath your skin. that trembling in your chest, it's not fear, it's freedom. Because when you stop clinging to what was, you start becoming what you came here to be. The water no longer drowns you, it lifts you. You no longer carry the cross. You rise above it. This is the last lesson, and it's already written in your bones. Let go, to rise. You always felt there was something more. A flicker behind the curtain, a whisper behind the noise, a strange ache for something you couldn't name. That wasn't imagination, that was memory, not of facts or events, but of truth. A truth so ancient, it wasn't taught. It was felt, and then forgotten. Because the Age of Pisces didn't just teach obedience, it buried the memory of who you really are beneath symbols, dogma, and fear disguised as salvation. But that memory was never lost, just waiting, dormant, encoded in the silence between heartbeats, in the moments of déjà vu, in the dreams where you flew and remembered how. You didn't forget because you were weak. You forgot because that was the lesson. To remember from within, not because someone told you, but because something inside you cracked open and the light spilled out. Pisces gave the illusion. You were the key meant to break it. And now, it's happening. All around you, people are waking up. Not to new information, but to old truth. That divinity was never above. It was within. That the kingdom wasn't in heaven. It was hidden in the heart. You've been chasing something that was already yours. You've been seeking something that was never missing, only masked. And now, the mask is falling. The illusion isn't vanishing because someone exposed it. It's dissolving because your frequency outgrew it. You're starting to see it in the stories that no longer move you, in the systems that no longer resonate, in the quiet rebellion inside you that says, this isn't the whole truth. You are not betraying your faith by questioning it. You are honoring it by going deeper. This is what Pisces prepared you for, to become the one who remembers, not just for yourself, but for the many who still sleep. You are the anomaly, the echo that turned into a voice, the key that unlocked the veil. And when the illusion dissolves, something else appears. Clarity, presence, power, not over others, but over yourself. Because when you remember, not just who you are, but why you came, you stop running, you stop hiding, you stop shrinking to fit the frame of a fading age. You stand, not in defiance, but in remembrance. The memory was buried, but you were the key. And now that it's opened, you can't go back. You were never meant to. You're not here to follow the script. You're here to write the new one. It was never about the stars. Not really. Not about Pisces or Aquarius. Not about the fish or the water bearer. Not even about the heavens above, but the one within. You were taught to trace constellations, to name epochs, to map the sky like it held all the secrets. And yes, the sky remembers, but it was always a reflection. The cycle was you. The rise and fall of ages, the stories of gods, prophets, martyrs, saviors. They weren't just cosmic chapters. They were symbols, archetypes, mirrors for your becoming. Pisces wasn't just 2,000 years of faith and forgetting. It was a journey through the fog of illusion, so you could rediscover your own light. And Aquarius isn't just the next page in the astrological book. It's the moment the mirror clears, the moment the seeker becomes the source. Because this was never about time. It was about timing. Your soul chose this transition for a reason. To be the bridge, to remember the story, and then transcend it. not to destroy Pisces, but to understand it, to honor what it taught, and release what no longer serves, the guilt, the waiting, the silence, the worship of power disguised as peace. You were never meant to stay in the temple. You were meant to realize you are the temple. And as the systems unravel, as the myths fade, as the voices that once commanded fall silent, something rises. Your voice, your knowing, your frequency. That's what this has always been about. Not escaping one age and entering another, but remembering that the wheel turns inside you, that your consciousness shapes the cosmos, not the other way around. The ages were a stage, but you were the story, not the victim, not the observer, but the writer, the revealer, the light that breaks the spell. So when they ask what changed, tell them, I remembered, not the dates, not the doctrines, but the truth behind the veil, that the kingdom isn't coming. It was always here, in your breath, in your body, in your being. You are not bound to cycles. You are the awareness that watches them pass. So now, as one age dissolves into mist and another begins to take form, don't just celebrate a new era. Embody it. The mirror has turned, and now it reflects not just the stars, but the one who was always meant to awaken. It was never about the ages. It was about you. If something stirred in you during this voyage, if a memory reawakened, if the spell of the old age began to crack, then this message was meant for you. You are not alone. You are not crazy. And you are not late. You arrived right on time. So if this message spoke to you, don't let it stay silent. Share it. Comment below and tell us what part of you is beginning to remember. Because when we speak, we awaken each other. Subscribe to this channel, not for content, but for communion. Because this is more than a video. This is a mirror. And the next one, waiting to see their reflection, might need you to show it. This ... is the hidden voyage. And you, beloved soul, are home, soul whisper, and soul creator. The hidden voyage. If this journey moves something in you, don't let it end in silence. Let it echo. Share it with someone still afraid to speak of death, still avoiding the mirror, still pretending time is infinite. Let this video be the hand you extend, the torch you pass, the doorway they didn't know they were seeking. Leave a comment, not just to speak, but to witness. What part of you is beginning to awaken? What have you been avoiding that now asks to be seen? And if your soul feels ready to keep walking, deeper, quieter, truer, then this is your place. Not just a channel, but a temple. Subscribe and join a circle of seekers who no longer run from the end because they've begun to live from it. We release these videos like offerings, each one a prayer, each one a mirror, each one a map to awaken before the end, to remember who you are beneath the name, to walk together toward what cannot die, one breath at a time, one truth at a time, one sacred step on the hidden voyage. Soul whisper and soul creator. The hidden voyage.